All right, we'll get started. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for staying inside rather than being outside in the nice weather. Hopefully you have some things that you guys want to talk about yourselves and share with us and maybe inquire of each other how you're dealing with things. But I've got Brad Banasic on today also to talk about any kind of legal questions you might have. There's a lot of stuff going on. Jen is downtown, so we don't have a specific legislative information for you other than to say the budget's a long ways from being finished. And the legislature still isn't moving a lot because they still are in the House at a tie, and that won't get it resolved until pretty much right the end of this month. That'll be taken care of. But then we'll probably see things moving very quickly from the beginning of May through the end of June. But I'll get started and just talk about two issues that came to light. And one was actually today. MASB was fortunate. We this morning hosted a discussion on K-12 cybersecurity. And the National Director of Cybersecurity out of the White House was here, along with the Department of Technology Management and Budget, who has the state security chief security officer that protects state government in the cyber area, plus a number of other federal and state officials. And the focus was on K-12, and we had a lot of technology directors from ISDs, because as I think you're hopefully well aware that many of our districts don't have the capacity or maybe are too small. So you might have an IT director if you're lucky, but you definitely likely don't have a cybersecurity director. And so the ISDs provide a lot of that coverage. So we had, I don't know, probably eight ISDs represented with different individuals. We had some consortiums represented in that area, along with a few of the other statewide associations. And it was a good conversation, but it was interesting. At the end of it, I was talking to one of the tech directors from the ISD, and the question that she posed to me was, does MASB do anything to inform school board members on cybersecurity and the threat that it is to local districts and ISDs? And sadly, I had to answer, we don't. I think we have, touched on it maybe where I've made comments in a webinar. Maybe there might have been a clinic session, but I can't even think of one. We've done a lot of the school security side of things, but that's the physical security, not the technological side of things. And yet we've had many districts have cyber attacks, and we've had districts in our state pay ransoms that were extensive, north of $1 million. To get their data and their system back under their control. And so when we think about that world and the number of attacks that are happening in the public sector, that is the place that bad actors really are spending their time, because there's lots of public information, lots of email addresses that are easy to access. And, the board role in that is small, but it did make me think about, maybe we do need to think about a class, a workshop, a webinar, where we bring some expertise to help raise awareness because of the threats that you face in your school district and how easy something is to actually have happen. Cyber actually is likely one of the bigger threats. You post all of your budget information online. So if you are a bad actor, you go online and figure out, how much money does this school district have? Start looking for ways into your district, and it becomes a fairly scary thought process. And one of the places that we are hearing about nationally, and SETSEG as an insurance carrier, or insurance pool, I should say, that many of you have, does a lot in this space, and they communicate with your superintendents and business managers about it. But what now we're seeing is when entities like K-12s are gone after, they really want to get elementary kids' social security numbers, because they create false identifications and they can sell those numbers out on the dark web, and it's a real thing. We see this happening nationally. And it's something that, it exists. You have to have that data and information. And thanks for that, Stan. I appreciate that. And so I guess I would actually encourage you to do what Stan just did, is post in there what kind of information you think would be useful to you as board members. And I do think one of the big things that and lots of our things, right? It's training you to ask, what questions should you ask of your superintendent or assistant superintendents about what we're doing in this area to keep things safe. I know in between October and Christmas of 23, so just a few months ago, I think we had 4 to 6 districts that were gotten into in that period of time. And some of our districts are in a place where they have great backup systems. And when these actors come in and actually hold the whole system hostage, they can actually, in essence, blow them off, and they completely restore everything from a backup, and they keep operating, and the downtime is very minimal. We've also had districts in the state of Michigan, as I said earlier, that have paid ransom. We've had others that have been shut down for multiple days until they could get maybe backups up and running. So there's a broad swath of where schools are in Michigan. And, sadly, as you make decisions about resources, you're likely always going to pick to have a teacher in a classroom or whatever it might be, as opposed to hiring a technology director or something along those lines, until you lose $2 million and you realize just how many teachers aren't going to be employed when that happens. And the big issue that, and your superintendent's likely received this letter this spring, and SETSEG is telling, they are the pool that provides insurance, but they have to go out to reinsurance partners to actually set the limits. And more and more of those reinsurers, not just for K-12, but public entities, are starting to say, we can't insure that any longer. Like it's too much of a risk for us as an insurance company to do that. And so SETSEG luckily keeps finding entities to do that and provide the coverage for all of you that are in that pool, as does some of the other pools in Michigan. But it's getting harder and harder just because of the risk here. So I'm looking at that Stan, I like your question on the white hat hackers. I don't know if we can, but it would be a conversation to be had with SETSEG. I know there are some companies out there. So MASB subscribes to one that many districts are starting to, because SETSEG put it out there. It's a company called Arctic Wolf, and they run penetration tests, if not weekly, on a monthly basis. I know that they do that to MASB now. I know that a number of districts have that. So it's a company, in essence, doing that very thing, and their cost is pretty low at least on an individual basis. I don't know what it would be on a statewide basis, but that is a place that really districts need to go. There has to be that space. A couple of years ago, SETSEG sent out a questionnaire. It was like a red light, green light. You had like 6 questions. We did the same test here, and we had some reds on our test. And so it caused our IT folks to be like, okay, we've got to make some changes in these areas to get so that we were all greens. That done 3 years ago has done a lot to help school districts did the same test, and it's really up the level for many, many districts in the state. To the point, one of the SETSEG representatives was in the meeting this morning, and their reinsurer actually said they wish that other states were doing as much as they're seeing in Michigan in this space. We're still very short and very at risk, but we're doing a lot more. So, Kurt, no, they're really, we didn't have anybody there taking notes. It was, in essence, a closed conversation because of some of the folks that were involved, and districts putting out information in the group that they wouldn't want shared publicly. So it was very closed about that. Mark, you asked the question, it moves into a different topic, but I'll answer it. The two seats that are up for election today are both in what we would consider Democratic strongholds. So the full expectation is that the two Democrats that are running will win those seats. That will then take the tiebreaker in the House back to the Democratic majority and allow them to keep working. So that was a good question to ask there. Carolyn, I don't have see those questions right there. So Carolyn, you asked the question, what kind of backup server do we need? How much does that cost? And that's what you would ask your superintendent. And what is your insurance coverage? So there are varying levels of insurance. So it would be good for you to know, like, what is your coverage level? What's your protection? That's a legitimate thing to ask. And the question isn't so much what kind of backup server. It might be just like, do we have like a plan in place if we are attacked? Do we have everything backed up? Those are the things, like, as a board member, like, you probably don't need to know what kind of server, or if it's in the cloud or if it's physical. You just need to know, is it happening? Do you have a plan in place? What steps would you take? And I will tell you, when MASB we provide technology services to a couple of other school associations. So it wasn't one of our staff members, but one of those a few years ago did click on the link in an email and opened up, in essence, that person's whole email address, which included every superintendent in the state. So then an email went out to every superintendent in the state. And we didn't have, as we then worked with our insurance company and we worked with law enforcement to like figure this out, like, we didn't have all of the things in place. Now, this was pre-COVID. Now I feel very comfortable with where we are. Luckily for us, we don't, like, even though we have all of your email addresses and your names, we don't hold any credit card data. We don't hold any social security data. So I feel all of you are well protected from, in our perspective right now. But in that case, when that happened, it went out, and then we had school districts clicking on the link, and they were skilled. They were in the inbox of this staff member. And so when somebody sent her an email to say, is this legitimate? She never saw it. They answered, yes, it is legitimate. And so, like, she didn't even know that it had happened, and they were far enough ahead to be able to respond to anybody doing that. And that caused more people to click. And they were looking for ways to get into, not just getting names and addresses. They wanted to get into somebody's system where they could get to financial information and other things. To our knowledge, they never did. We were able to, we caught it right, like, within about an hour of it happening, and it took a while, but like, we were able to address it. But it was like, that can happen to anybody, and you as districts have far more sensitive data and information than MASB does. Crystal, nice to know in Avondale, like, that was one of the questions that came up today was, how many school board members have had their superintendent or IT director give you an update and say, here's what we've done or where we're at on cyber. And I would be interested in that. If others have said, yes, we've had this, that would be good to know, because it's just becoming an area that we don't, like, it's hard to focus on it. Often you don't have the staff, because even an IT director, which we have here at MASB, like, his expertise is not in cybersecurity. He can get the network up and running. He can do other things, but that's not where it's at. And what I heard a lot from schools today, of course, and you hear this in school psychologists, school social workers, is it's very hard at the level of salary that public entities pay, not just schools, but everybody, to be able to keep them. You might hire the person out of college and they work for 3 years and learn a lot, and then they go to the private sector and make real money, as they would say. And so we talked about that training ground. How do we actually get people into the pipeline for employment? And so that came up, and DTMB was able to answer some questions to school people on that. But it did prompt me to say, like, I think we'll look at what we can do I actually want to encourage some of those ISDs that were really knowledgeable today. Our call for proposals for our conference is open still right now, to maybe think of them doing a clinic session this fall to talk about that and let board members kind of hear what is going on. Mark, yeah, or no, who's, oh, yeah. It is a disaster. James Johnson said it's a disaster recovery plan. And he's an IT guy, so he's using more technical terms than I am. Mark from Oakland, I mean, your board is being updated on a regular basis, which is great. I think that probably happens more often at an ISD or a RESA because of you're often, as I said at the beginning, the one providing that. And then if somebody else, yep, when your neighbor gets hacked, or succumbs to a phishing attack, that does tend to wake you up and make you decide we need to do something at our district. But it was interesting. One of the people that was in the room today was they have a cyber command at the state police, and so districts can reach out to them for resources and conversations. And the state legislature, when they created the cyber command, made them exempt from FOIA because they wanted to be able to have public entities reach out to them and be honest about what was going on without the risk of hackers and others being able to then FOIA that information. And I don't even know in the room that everybody knew that they were exempt from FOIA, and that could cause some people not to reach out to them. And so that was just interesting information in that question. Stan, you have, or I should say, Brad, you have a question Stan posed about closed session in this regard. Do you want to look at that? And
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Stan. That's a great question. And that's one of the more recent additions to the Open Meetings Act, closed meeting exceptions, allowing you to go into closed session for security planning to address existing threats or potential threats to students and staff. I think the intent of that exception was security planning, physical security, right? But there hasn't been any interpretations of that exception. So I think clearly security planning could cover not only the physical threats, but cyber threats as well. And the purpose behind that closed meeting exception is you don't want the bad people to be able to access the information and plans that a school district has established to address some type of physical attack, or in this case, a cyber attack. So, yeah, I would interpret that exception to allow the board to go into closed session to plan for security attacks and establish, procedures and other documents relating to preparation. Now that does require a 2/3 majority vote, so that's one closed session exception where you need 5 board members to vote in the affirmative via roll call vote.
Yeah, Kurt, Arctic Wolf is the cybersecurity program that I mentioned. As I said, MASB uses it. And another one that we see a lot of schools using, and I think there's a discount if you're with SetSeg, and our staff uses it. It's not this, it's actually staff training. And it's a company called Know Before. And they run regular, like we, on a monthly basis, we require all of our staff. Many of them hate it. And they've tried, I'll give the company credit for trying to make it more interesting. But it is continual. It does a couple of things. It has training, which allows us to watch videos and do things and have to answer quizzes as staff to know, like, was this a phishing attack? Was it not? Whatever it might be. Does this link look suspicious? What are some giveaways in this email that would tell you shouldn't click on it? But it also, from a company perspective, it allows our IT team to put together fake emails that are simulated attacks. And if we click on them, it tracks that. And so if we have staff members that have taken the training, but yet still click on everything, then we can escalate and make sure that they are getting additional training and figuring out why they continue to click on it. And we then monitor what our click rates are and how we're doing. It allows you to send any email that you get that's suspicious. You can send it to what they call like the fish. You click on the fish button and you send it to IT. And if they clear it, then it comes back to you. Otherwise, like it's taken away. And that one I know the KnowBe4 as a subscription service is relatively, now everything's resources, right? But relatively inexpensive. And I do know a lot of districts that are using that. An entity of a district size, right? All of the teachers and everybody that's in there, you're not going to have your students doing it. And of course, they're receiving emails through your system, but often you have bifurcated networks. You have students on one network that can't tie into some of your stuff. You have, your teachers might be in others. And nobody brought that up today. That was one of the things that I was surprised by was, and frankly, the feds in the state can't do anything about it, but it is creating awareness amongst your staff about the cybersecurity threat, right? Like you're at a governance level and maybe your superintendent's giving you updates, but how do you bring your teachers up to date to know that they are a part of the solution in protecting the district, right? They have to be aware of links they click on, emails that they open, websites that they visit, and it's making them aware and feeling a joint responsibility to protect the district by doing the right things. And that is a subject that I've heard from a number of districts. It's just hard. It's hard to get that many people that frankly don't have a background in it. And for us, we can do it with 30 people a little easier, but when you're dealing with hundreds of school employees, it's a little harder space to deal with. So Charles just posted that KnowBe4 is something they use and it works. And yes, Mark, number one entry point and is a person. I mean, yes, we are the weakest link in all of this. There's no doubt about it. If we didn't, weren't for us, nobody could get into our systems. We had a district breached this winter. Was it a district this winter? They actually got in through, or maybe it was another public entity. They got in through their HVAC control system. Like, because everything's automated, right? Everybody, even at your homes, you have a Nest thermostat on your wall that's now tied to your Wi-Fi. And they realized that this HVAC system it connected to the network, but didn't have the same network security. And they actually got into the entity through their HVAC system. I mean, that like, you just don't, it's hard for us as lay people even to think about it and going like, oh, we need to make sure that is, secure. It's just not something, and frankly, our staff don't know all of it either. So I don't want to take up all kinds of time on this. I did more than I wanted to. Crystal, you might be right. I have not. I will tell you, if you have a proposal and we're only now about 5 days past it, I would encourage you to submit it. Shoot me an email and say, Don, I have one and we want to submit it, and I will make sure that Mackenzie gets it. I know that we haven't reviewed them yet. So if there's something that you're trying to get in, we're going to look at it, even if we're a few days past the deadline. The other topic that I want to touch on, and I see there's a question already for Brad on labor, school board elections, November election season. You're going to see in Leaderboard magazine, my column this month is about school board elections. And it's really right now, or even earlier than now, but right now is when you should be checking with every board member on your board that their seat is up for election. Figure out, are you running again? Are you not running again? And if somebody says, I'm not running again, it's important that you as a board have a plan for that. You could leave it up to like, okay, that seat's vacant and we're going to let people know that it's vacant. We would tell you that that is not enough at MASB. Our goal is not that you go out and handpick people. That's not what we're advocating for. But you should have a plan. Like, are there people that you have interacted with that have been at your board meetings, that are active in your PTAs and PTOs, that you think could take the next step to be a school board leader? And if so, somebody on your board should be reaching out to them and saying, have you thought about this? We're going to have some resources up on our website like we've done in the past for the Get On Board campaign. We're going to have just a 2-pager back and front that almost is like something you could hand to somebody that's kind of interested, and you could like read this. This is what it is to be a school board member, so that they're aware of that. We are going to be running in the month of June and a little bit in July. I think we had at least a half a dozen virtual town hall meetings, to let people that are interested attend and learn what it means to be a board member, learn what like filing deadlines and that, and be able to ask questions. Those are already posted on our calendar on our website. You can see what the dates are. We'll be sharing them, but know that that's out there. Going as school board members yourselves to your Lions Club, Rotary Club, Chamber, like really in between now and the end of the school year, attend every PTO or have somebody attend every PTO meeting and say, we have a vacancy coming up. And we just want to let you know that we're looking for, student focused, civic minded people to run for our board. Because we know that there are people not in every community that are running to be disruptors. They're running with agendas. And that's not all bad. And some of you may have started that way yourselves, that you had an issue. But on the flip side of that, like there's a lot that a district and a board can do in advance to ensure that at least it's not nobody running, or that to ensure that there's a choice for the public. Like that, to me, when a school board is being active, it is about providing a choice for the community, making sure there are choices available for people to run for the board. I know it's not easy. I know a lot of people don't want to put their feet in that, particularly with November elections, 6-year terms for those that have that. But I think if you talk to some of your counterparts that have had a lot of board turmoil, where they've spent now the last 2 years spending a lot of time doing adult conversations and not a lot of time talking about student achievement and other things, they would probably tell you, I wish we would have done a better job. Now, it doesn't prevent everything, right? People still vote, and it's still up to the voters who they put in. But if you leave it completely open and don't do anything, you do create a risk. And so, I just bring that up. That's a huge issue. And you can see Larissa put the Get On Board information in chat. Brad mentioned the filing deadline, but questions about board recruitment, having those conversations in a public meeting, concerns about that. I'm just interested in feedback. I've talked to boards that do this regularly. This is their plan. It's how they do it. And then I have others that are like, oh no, we've never talked about it. If there's an empty seat, it's an empty seat. So I'm interested if you have any feedback in this area.
Just quick point on one, there isn't any obligation, under law for school districts to publicize their expiring terms like there was in the past, when school boards actually conducted the elections. But even though it's not a legal requirement, as Don was mentioning, still a good idea to put out there on your website and any other places, maybe social media accounts. These are the terms that are expiring and are open for election. And particularly when you've had a vacancy since the last election, because that could create an abbreviated term on your upcoming ballot. If you have 6-year terms, and you could maybe have a 2-year or 4-year term on your ballot that no one knows about, and everyone files for the full terms, and no one files for the abbreviated terms. So if you put a notice out there letting folks know, okay, these are the terms up for elections, you may get a more balanced selection of candidates as far as what terms they're running for.
Barb, thanks for that, Brad. Barb, you mentioned in Rochester, you are got a group that's running as a slate. We are actually seeing that both from the people that are maybe beating up schools and from people that are pro school. Like we're seeing slates are becoming more regular in that. We also had a situation last election cycle. There was no divisiveness, but we had a district where 4 board members were stepping off of the board at the end of their term. And nobody filed for the seat, for any of the 4 seats. That was a smaller rural district, but we've done the analysis. It happens all over the place, not to that extreme, but that set up a situation where they didn't even have enough board members to do appointments once the election closed. They had to turn to the ISD for help in that space to get to even have the majority to be able to make those conversations. So like sometimes you don't do it thinking, oh, there's nothing going on here. There's no, like divisiveness, which you're right, but it also could lead to having nobody run, which isn't necessarily the best outcome either. So I'm looking to see, what if you've got a board member who hasn't decided whether, Stan, I had a conversation just a week ago with another board in that same space. Probably not in a board meeting, but in private conversation. Like it is good to be able to have the conversation with that individual and say, like the earlier that we know about this, the better off the district is to be able to continue to serve our kids the way that you wanted to as a board member, the way you have as a board member over this period of time. And so you're kind of appealing to their altruism that got them to run, to also get them to make a decision, because it does allow the board to start having conversations. And without that, you can't have them. So I think that's what you have to do. Mark mentions when they were on a local board, planned in place for recruiting individuals, same at the ISD. Colleen, what is your position on sitting board members endorsing candidates? So MASB doesn't have a position on that. It is a risky proposition, right? Like, if you endorse somebody for the board seat and they lose and somebody else wins, it all automatically, unless that person is really open-minded, creates conflict on the board, because they're looking at you as somebody that for some reason, maybe it wasn't that you didn't like them, but you just had a relationship with the other, but their thought might be that you didn't like them. And so I think that's a tough place. I think it creates divisiveness. I'll use myself as an example, and I'm not a school board member, but a citizen in a community with 2 kids in a school. And we had a pretty contentious school board election 2 years ago. Like, I wanted to be able to speak up and say, here are the school board candidates that I think would serve well. And from my position, it might have had some merit within the community to hear that. On the flip side, if I had done that and the people that I thought would be good school board members lost, I risked their membership in our association. Like, there was a chance that they would have dropped out of MASB. And I was like, I can't take that risk. And so I think as an individual school board member, it's up to you. You get to do it. And there's nothing against that. You are a citizen. But there's a risk to it. And that's all I'll say. But we don't give specific guidance to say do it or don't do it.
And I think, it might be a little bit of a different situation if you have a slate of candidates running against the incumbents. And in that case, I don't have an issue with incumbents running as a slate together. And actually, if it's 4 or more board members who are up for election that want to get reelected, they can meet as a quorum of the board to discuss strategy to get reelected as a slate of incumbents. There's an exception under the Open Meetings Act on that matter. But yeah, that's a situation where I think it would be okay, for board members to endorse each other as incumbents when you have another group out there that is trying to unseat the incumbents.
Thanks for that, Brad. I appreciate that. Brad, I'm going to go back. I think Kurt had the question about, are we hearing anything on the prohibitive subjects, like any lessons learned yet? Kind of where things are in contracts out there?
Yeah, just some anecdotal information that I've had with conversations with superintendents and other attorneys. At this point, the negotiations don't seem to be that contentious. The MEA is putting their proposals out there. Just be careful. When reviewing those proposals, I've seen them. Includes a lot of unnecessary language to include in the contract. I've seen a proposal relating to evaluations and discipline, and the discipline proposal would increase the discipline and termination threshold to just cause from arbitrary and capricious. Now, it would still be arbitrary and capricious under law for a tenured teacher, but in the contract, it would be just cause, which would be a higher termination standard. So while you could possibly terminate a teacher under the Tenure Act, you may not be able to terminate that individual under your contract if you accept that type of language. What I'm also a little surprised at is that MEA doesn't seem to be pursuing the issue of dues deduction. We thought that would be a major issue that the MEA wanted to get back in contracts to get school districts to deduct union dues. But that doesn't appear to be the case. In the conversations I've had, it doesn't seem to be coming up that frequently at bargaining tables, and we thought maybe that would be a bargaining chip, that school boards could use to kind of hold on to and present to negotiate some more favorable language.
I was recently talking to a district too, Brad, where they have their contract expired December 31st. They're still without a contract. They've generally reached agreement on wages and benefits. It is all of the language stuff that they are now, taking months to work through and have conversations on. And that's, causing delays and things, but, in this case, the MEA is being pretty adamant about, getting certain language in, and, even though the district is, trying to be generous on the wages and benefits side of things. So, I said I was doing an interview the other day, and I said, with all of the changes that were made, in particular, the change related to having a contract that expires and how costs and step increases are dealt with, and that changed last year, I would expect that when we hit the beginning of September and schools are back in session, we will end up with a number of districts that will have teachers working without contracts, just because it's going to take longer to get some of this language stuff settled, because there's so much, right? There's so many things that they're proposing.
So I think one of the more interesting issues is going to be negotiating the metrics and data for teacher evaluations. And that evaluation law doesn't come into effect until July 1, but as everyone knows, we have this rater reliability requirement that must be met. The training must be met before September 1st. So if you don't have an agreement on the metrics and data for your evaluation tool, how are you going to have that rater reliability training prior to September 1st? So that's an issue to kind of keep up to date on. It's possible districts may get into a situation that, okay, we have to implement our evaluation tool. Now, it doesn't seem like there's going to be a lot of contention about what evaluation tool you're going to be using and the data and the metrics, but I mean, there could be. And if that isn't settled, in July, a district may be forced to implement their proposal on data and metrics in order to satisfy that rater reliability training requirement.
Other questions on labor, school elections, or topics?
I see Mark has a question here, Don. Is MEA pushing on the reopening of existing contracts that are not expiring this year? I was expecting to see that, Mark, but I haven't heard it. Just had a conversation yesterday with the superintendent down to Southwest Michigan, and he had a settled contract, and they just had discussions about the new unprohibited subjects of bargaining, and the union really didn't push for negotiations. They were satisfied with what the district was going to have in their policies. So in that case, they didn't make a demand to bargain to reopen the contracts to address those issues. And it may vary from kind of area to area. I would think maybe in a county like Genesee County, when there's more of a union presence as compared to Southwest Michigan, you might see a demand to bargain those subjects, even with a settled contract.
Another question for you, Brad, on letters of understanding or amendments.
Yeah, you can have a letter of understanding on any particular issue. One of the, I guess, questions related to that issue, Marianne, is does that letter of understanding have to come before the board for approval? Because it is kind of attached to the contract. Where the Michigan Employment Relation Commission stands on that issue, a letter of agreement would require board approval when it makes a significant impact on the contract. So in my opinion, any letter of agreement relating to these new mandatory subjects of bargaining, the unprohibited subjects of bargaining, if they're put into a contract through letter of agreement, yes, those letter of agreements would require board approval.
Other subjects that you're dealing with in districts that you think might be coming to a district near you soon that you'd like to share, like districts should be aware of something that's happening in your area? I'm looking at a couple of posts that came up. Colleen, that's an easy one for you on the question about board's finance committee, and still have a lot to learn. We do offer 2 or 3 school finance classes. At least our entry-level finance class is available online. So you can take it on your own pace and not have to wait to get into an open class. It is an institute weekend. I know that most people have plans already. We might actually have the CBA finance class offered this weekend here in Lansing. But I know it's available online. So I would go to our website and look in our training section, and you'll get some information, or you'll find the information there on trainings that we do in school finance. That's a great question. And I wish, having heard many stories, I wish that every board member that was in a position like yours would ask about what training's available, because often that isn't the case, and appreciate you making that response. So, and let's see, we need money for. Okay, so you need additional resources. What are our choices? Have already passed a bond for major renovations in our buildings in 2020. That's a good question, Carolyn. If you were dealing with renovations to your building, you could actually, and even additions, like, so an addition onto a building, you could go the sinking fund route if you didn't want to go down the bond route. Sinking funds are set in place as a millage for a limited period of time. They can be used for a number of things. But it's really the bond issue, and it is the sinking fund. I mean, frankly, I know of districts that would have passed a bond and 4 years later passed another bond just because of need and growth or things along those lines. So I think in some communities that would be like, wait a second, we just increased our taxes. Why are you coming to us again? In other communities, they're able to make the arguments that this elementary school had this many kids and all of a sudden we don't have enough space, and they're doing that. So bonds and sinking funds would be able to help you with that. Either one of those options. But just because you're 4 years later doesn't mean you couldn't go for another bond issue. That is something that you could use for sure. Jonetta, should every board member take training classes? Do you think it should be mandatory? That's a great question. Stan, you could answer that for me. That's a joke between him and I, but I'm very confident in MASB's classes. I have heard from many school board members that think they made a huge difference. And so I would encourage every board member to take MASB's classes, particularly our 9-100 level classes. What I have seen districts do, and I really appreciate this, even though they can't do anything to enforce it under like law. We do have boards that pass policies that say it's the expectation of this school district and this board that anybody elected to our board to our school board within their first term or within their first 2 years will be level 1 certified for MASB. I love the idea that a board comes together and sets the tone for what a district should be doing as they get elected. I think that's a great approach to it. There have been conversations about almost half the states in the country require school board training. Michigan is not one of those, but we were able to 2 years ago now. There is money in the school aid, or I'm sorry, in the Department of Ed budget. So for all of our 100 level classes, I believe, and most of our other ones, it's no longer a financial question. Like the state will reimburse you the $99 for our class. So it shouldn't be a hit to your budget. And it is something that board members could take advantage of online now. So time becomes less of an issue. We've really strived at MASB to make it as accessible as possible. So we've helped to get funding. We've helped to make it so that you don't have to do it in person if that's too difficult. So good question. I really, really do think that every board should at least try them out and see if they like them. And because we offer them in person and we offer them asynchronous, then we're in a place that we try to meet the different learning needs of individual board members as well. So there's a question out to the audience on robotics. It's an all volunteer based club in the district right now. Curious if other districts pay teachers as you know an addenda or an addition to their, just like you do with your sports coaches and other things. If you want to post in chat how you deal with robotics, Barb would be interested in that. And some of you have already answered that, so I appreciate that. Yeah, Jonette, I also think like it is one of the questions that we get often here is, I'm a board member, or there's 2 of us that have taken MASB classes. How do we convince others to do that? And that's hard. And what I have encouraged board members to do is have kind of show those other board members grace and patience. Like we're not in their shoes. We don't know what their life is. It might very well be difficult for them. And if you've taken the classes and model good behavior and can show them how they made a difference for you, that over time, maybe that happens. I will say the other way to maybe go down that road is we will come directly to your district and offer the CBA class to you, all 7 board members and the superintendent. So now we're bringing it to you. And so from a time perspective, yes, there is a 3-hour block there, but now you're learning together, which actually the research shows is better because then every board member is hearing the same thing at the same time. You can engage your soup at the same time. So that has a lot of benefit. And it's a little harder for a board member that wants to wiggle out of something if it's in your district being brought right there. And so, and even done that way, you can still submit that for state reimbursement. So like that would be something else that I would suggest if you're trying to get more people engaged, is offer it in your district just for your board and see if that might get them started down the road. Like that is a tact that I've heard districts use. I appreciate everybody that's answering the question on robotics. And you know, and one thing I'll say about robotics, and I'll say this, and I think I've said it on this, esports is now a really growing area. And when I say esports, if you're not aware, it's kids gaming, right? They're getting on, they're doing video games in a school-sponsored function. And I've had MASSP and the staff that runs one of the leagues in the state on my podcast, and they talked about the kids that are engaging, and I think robotics has a part of this, but you often engage kids that aren't engaged currently in other activities within the school district. And we know that if you get a kid engaged in an extracurricular activity, whether it's robotics or esports or something else, they become more engaged students. So there's a real argument why you want to treat a club as something equal to a sports type event, right? If you think it's important enough to put it on the schedule and pay a coach, like an academic pursuit, if there's enough interest there, is worthwhile. I had that conversation with my son this year in 8th grade. He was on the Quiz Bowl team. And I said, do they do announcements on how you did in Quiz Bowl? And he's like, no. But he's in sports, and I know that they do announcements in the school about how the sports team did when they played the night before, and they tell, oh, this kid scored this many points. And I'm like, well, to me, like as a school, that does a disservice to the clubs that are in that case, and that is a competitive club that, you know, you're winning and kids like accolades, every kid does. And so in that case, I just said, well, that's odd that the school doesn't even, this isn't about money and anything like that. It was like, they don't even lift them up the same way on school announcements. And I think that there's really some power in kids that are in clubs like that, or robotics, or others where they're competing, particularly to be able to put out there and say, our kids won, they took second place, they took whatever it is. And so I think we do have to lift up those extracurriculars. And esports, the number I think is 40% of the kids that are in esports never participated in any outside school activity before they did esports. That's a significant number of kids to engage in that esports space, with pretty minimal costs for the district. And the kids truly love it. And the thing is, now we have colleges offering scholarships in esports. You see big, Ferris State University is really big into esports. Most of the campuses now have esports. I'll call them stadiums because I think that's what they call them. The kids that actually announce esports, like, are looking at broadcasting majors in college. It's really, I mean, as an old guy that didn't play a lot of video games, like it's completely foreign to me, but it is amazing the engagement that schools are getting in that area. And I see people posting about sports, and that you're verifying some of the things that I've thrown out there. So it's really something to think about in your districts, just as Barb started this conversation because of the robotics question, but there's a lot of validity in this. Yes, Kurt, thanks for sharing that. I mean, I talked about cyber, that's not what they're dealing with, but MASA is holding a school safety summit later this month. And if you're interested, talk to your superintendent about attending. It is a really good conference for people to actually take part in. Yeah, I love to see what you're saying on esports. Good stuff. See, we have Barb posted, we have a district that's hosted a school health and safety summit. I've heard of some others doing the same thing, and it's a way to bring community members together. One thing that it might help on is, I don't know if any of you are in this situation, but I have noticed a trend with schools that are looking at school-based health centers that have been around in Michigan for 30 plus years, now getting pushback about whether you have them or not. There's like, I think people have like, there's a nefarious agenda to them, I guess. And so having health and safety summits and having transparency in why schools might go down that road. And if you're planning ahead and you do a summit and do that a couple times, and then if you bring up the need for, hey, we think based on community input, we should have a internal school health clinic, I think it becomes a much easier conversation because you've engaged the community in that conversation. Yeah, Nick, I love that example. 29 students, he didn't know any of them because they just hadn't participated before. Like that's the best, whatever the club is. And it's not even robotics. I mean, I think of all the clubs that schools offer, and I know it's hard to find a teacher to sponsor them and be out there. My kids have been involved in clubs, and I know for my daughter who graduated last year, she had one club in particular that truly made a difference in her life. Like that was her place to go kind of thing. And she was in other things, but that one really resonated for her. So, that piece as boards, the more that you can support things outside of the academic space, it will pay dividends in the academic space as well. We are only a couple of minutes from the end. I feel like I talked too much today. I'll apologize. I rattled on a lot. Sorry about that. And any last minute topics that you have questions for Brad? Anything else for MASB? Things that you're just burning to put out there?
Well, we're starting our superintendent search today, so I'm very excited to interview our 4 candidates. I don't know if anyone else is going through that. I would love to know if there is other districts also interviewing.
I can tell you, Carolyn, there are. I saw Barb just raised her hand. I think the number that I last checked with our team since July 1st were around 76 districts that have turned over superintendents. And I see a few people raising hands saying that they are in that process. The last 2 years we've been in the low to mid 80s. Looks like we'll probably be in a similar number of turnovers this year, which is down from our 2 years during COVID where we were at 100 and 101 and 103. So right around 80 is the historical average that we've seen over the last 8 years, probably minus those 2 100 years.
Well, that's good news. It sounds like it's becoming more leveled off.
It does seem that way. As I talk to our search consultants and the people that run it for us here, and but there is still a lot of turnover, and that's hard for a district, and that board superintendent relationship becomes more important because you're hiring more often inexperienced soups just because of the turnover, and you've got to give them the space to learn, encourage that they take PD and that kind of thing. Barb, you have a comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to share that, we interviewed, we narrowed it to 4 candidates and ended up interviewing 3 for the final position. We did not have a unanimous vote. We did not have consensus for our selection, but we did bring forward a motion after the vote was cast to select the final candidate, and there was not consensus. We brought forward a motion that stated that as a board and as individuals, we will work cooperatively with whomever is the selected candidate, and that passed unanimously. So while it wasn't a full unanimous, there was no consensus on the final candidate, there was consensus that at least publicly facing, everyone has agreed to work with the selected candidate, even if they chose not to vote for that particular selection.
Barb, that was a great thing to share. I think that's an issue that actually happens more than we think, where boards don't reach consensus. I don't know as many that go to the formal space that you guys did, but at some point you're sitting there and you realize that you're not on you're in the 2 votes that like somebody else, and you make a decision to say, I understand that my candidate is not getting the majority votes. I will change my vote and support this candidate because we believe it's important to be supportive of the new person. But the way you approached it works perfectly fine as well.
Yeah, it was a 4-3 vote. It wasn't, it wasn't like a 5-2, which usually is what it is.
Yeah.
So fortunately, I was happy to see that final vote.
Mark, do you have a question? I saw your hand up, although now I just saw it disappear.
Nope, just happened to left it up. We're interviewing 6 candidates this evening, or all between this evening and tomorrow evening. So,
and we're still hearing of districts we just last week we got a call that said our superintendent announced August 1 they're retiring. And then as districts hire superintendents that are previous superintendents, that district opens up, and then And so there's no longer a downtime like we're doing searches all the way through like July, August, it doesn't stop. Okay, we're at 3 minutes after 1. I want to say thanks for everybody for joining us. Hopefully it was worthwhile. And Barb just posted the link for the school health and safety summit that they've done. It might be for those that are interested. I'll leave it up here a little bit so you can click on it and get that up into your web browser if you're interested in that. You know, we do these every 2 months. If you have questions of me, of Brad, of any of our staff, go to our website, grab our emails and send us an email. We definitely don't need to wait until these happen for you to have questions answered. So make sure that you do that. And with that, I'll say, hopefully the weather keeps getting nicer. We're going to be in summer shortly. So thanks for being here and have a great weekend.